I'm gonna show you guys the absolute barbarity of Israel's actions, and we've seen public officials make these confessions about the crimes of America in ways we haven't seen before. Where they say, "Come on, man, you guys are picking on Israel because you guys are anti-Semitic. You guys are just picking on the Jewish state. Don't you know we all wage war? Look at all the wars there's waged. Why are you picking on Israel? Have you guys seen what we did in Afghanistan? I'm like, I can't believe you guys admitting your guys' war crimes for one. Secondly, this whole thing that they keep putting out there saying, "Oh man, there are wars going on everywhere." Stop. Like I explained before, in like the first 5 months, you have more women and children killed in this conflict than all wars combined over 5 years. And I saw this headline. This is actually a few months ago. Amount of Israeli bombs dropped on Gaza surpasses that of World War II. And now this is what I want to ask you about your reactions to Israel's campaign in Gaza and how you've been messaging this to people. But this is the news I saw as I'm preparing the show, which seems to be huge. Obviously, people analyzing what the consequences of this is. You have the UN as essentially labeling Israel a terrorist state now, putting Israel on a blacklist, a country that harm and targets children in conflict zones. So I'm gonna speak on this a little bit later, but Dr. CBS, is there anything you want to add? Like, how have you been discussing this war in Gaza, and what do you think a lot of people may misunderstand about the Zionist entity known as Israel?
Well, so the first thing that I've been emphasizing is that persons have called what's happening an unfolding genocide, or that the genocide started after October 7th. What I've been emphasizing is that this is just a war intensified genocide moving toward decimation. Now, decimation is an actual war process. The term decim means 10. So a process of retribution is where you kill 1 in 10 people in a particular country as retribution, right? But the genocide has been ongoing since the Nakba, right? And so I want to emphasize that, because genocide is not reducible to extermination. Yeah. Right? Genocide has to do with the attempt to eliminate or eradicate a group in whole or in part. And that includes the manifold forms of ethnic cleansing, apartheid, and displacement, and just ongoing routinized violence that Palestinians have been experiencing in Gaza, in the West Bank, and throughout occupied Palestine since 1948. So I've emphasized that for number one. The second thing is that this war in Israel would not be possible, obviously, or this Israeli war on Gaza would not be possible without protracted U.S. support. Israel is effectively a vassal state, arguably the most important vassal state of the United States. And without that support, this war could be stopped tomorrow if Biden actually had a so-called red line. If the ruling class in this country had any moral compass, any ethical foundation, any humanity whatsoever, this could have not only been stopped months and months ago, but prevented from happening altogether. Thirdly, this conflict actually has, I think, given life to an internationalism that we really haven't seen in a very long time. Yeah. There was some international solidarity around the initial invasion of Iraq, but it's nothing like we've seen now. And certainly support for Palestine is nothing like we've seen now. So many, I can speak from the context of academia. So many academics fell into that sort of category of PEP, right? Progressive Except Palestine. Now more and more are speaking up, and more are especially willing to get behind students after so many students have been brutalized, their encampments torn down, et cetera. I think that's bringing more faculty and staff to consciousness. And so, Palestine, the liberation of Palestine is not reducible to a ceasefire. It's complete decolonization that's necessary, and reparations. And so I think that it's really, really important to be clear about when we say free Palestine, it's like, what do we actually mean?
Yeah, well said. And I love your point. And I would love to see, and I'm glad to hear you say that many people in academia are turning around, because I'm at the point right now where I just want to take the win because there's still a side of me that's kind of upset that people let it get this bad, because RBN, myself, we've been a channel that put the Palestine issue front and center. We held people's feet to the fire over this issue, and I feel like the left in the United States have been extremely weak on this issue. I talk about progressives except Palestine. I covered this issue for a very long time. I think a lot of people who demonized Palestinian resistance and fell for Zionist talking point. It seems like, and I may be in a sweet summer child right now, but it seems like a lot of people are legit turning, meaning people who was bad on this, like holy fuck, like they just blown away by this. Like even people who like Crystal Ball is my favorite example because she's going hard on covering this issue. But just before the genocide, well, I should say before October 7th, she was saying anyone who voted for a third party should grow up. Now she's like, yeah, I endorse Jill Stein, I support third parties now. And the point is, I'm taking the win because I am seeing the gigantic shift. I'm seeing this.
Yeah.
Are you seeing? You seeing the same thing as well, right?
I so I will say I think that many people are still, I think most people don't support armed struggle, period. They just don't, right? And I think that there's still
Yeah.
some hesitancy around that. But I do think that people are drawing connections not only between like U.S. imperialism and Israeli aggression, but also making the connections, for example, between Israel and Congo and Sudan and Haiti,
Yes.
and how U.S. imperialism and corporate domination and Western imperialism are like undergird all of the sort of every all of the destruction in the world is effectively, right. And so I think that we do need to have some sort of political humility and let people develop their consciousness. So some people are still at ceasefire, which is better than Israel has a right to defend itself, right? And so I think that
Yeah.
we need to, our historical task on the left is to have the political education and to sort of win those people over to a more radical,
So
more
glad you said
revolutionary
that.
position. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that, and that's why, guys, I go so hard for my position of a one-state solution. I believe Israel is a state that does not deserve the right to exist, especially after the story I'm about to show you guys. I don't know how anyone could come to this conclusion, and a lot of people say, "Well, there's actually Palestinian groups who support the two-state solution." Nick, don't you know? And I'm like, guys, Palestinians, they are faced with such massive retaliation, violence, threats to their lives. They've actually brave for them to come out for a two-state solution. And so
And
it's
if
our
we
job.
have to
Oh,
take class. We have to take class seriously, just like there are handkerchief heads at Black folks who support Israel. There are Black folks. There are a
yeah,
range of Black people. Palestine. If we're taking Palestinian people seriously, we're not. As anti-imperialists, we have to realize that everybody's not going to have the same perspective, right? There are people who support the Palestinian Authority. There are people who support Hamas. There are people who support a two-state solution. There are people, even a few like backward folks who whatever. Anyway, so they're not a monolithic political position, and we have to study, right? And we have to have a class analysis in everything that we do, not just we can't make any exceptions. And so, of course, there are going to be people who support a two-state solution.
yeah,
That's normal.
yeah, and that's very well said. Why I often say, because this is why I ask white allies and people who stand with Black people in our issues. Like
Mm-hmm.
when you look at the violence that Palestinians are under threat, and I'm talking about like even in the United States, when you look at the financial retaliation, like if a
Mm-hmm.
Palestinian ever says the correct position, in my opinion,
Mm-hmm.
equal rights under the law. That's how we saw the apartheid in South Africa. They didn't solve apartheid in South Africa by creating another state, two state. No, there's a proven solution to this problem, which is why I support that solution. But if a Palestinian come out and say that, they be like, oh, look at this terrorist supporter who wants to destroy Israel because they hate the Jews. It's much more risky for them to do that, especially if you're in Israel, especially if you have a chance of violence. So it's upon us as the allies to stand out in front and advocate for the correct position. That's why I tell our white comrades when it comes to reparation and other issues as well. That is,
Mm-hmm.
we need our allies to take the frame. We need the allies, the people who really don't got skin in the game. It's our job to uphold. I was about to say the radical position, but it's not the right term. The true position. It's not
Mm-hmm.
about what's the most radical. What's the correct position? What solves the problem? But anyway, I want to get to the next part here. You're gonna see why the United Nations essentially labeled Israel as a terrorist state, and I actually was thinking about whether I was gonna share this on air. Like this is literally one of the most gruesome things I've ever read in my life. Literally one of the, and I read a lot. I've seen a lot. But this shit here, my friends, is next level evil. So the West is finally catching up to the position of RBN and our friends because I've covered the concentration camps in Gaza for months now. You know how I knew there was concentration camps in Gaza? Because I listened to Palestinians. There was plenty on the ground reporting talking about this stuff. The West only covered this stuff once they get a Western source. And we cannot do this. And I am not praising the New York Times for the story because you have Palestinians and their allies who report on this stuff. And it's not until white people tell them, oh yeah, the Palestinians were telling the truth. Why didn't y'all listen to the Palestinians when they was telling you guys about the concentration camps? By the way, that's why I reported on this months before the New York Times did. Because this was very open information here. The fact that they was rounding up all Palestinian men over the age of 12, by the way. Any men they just assumed wasn't a Hamas, they threw into this concentration camp. And it was being tortured to death. Stuff I have covered. And when I covered this weeks and weeks ago, I told you guys, as time goes on, we are going to get more and more gruesome details about this. So if you're sensitive about this, because I tell you, I'm a child. I don't like reading this kind of stuff. But for a historical record, I got to cover this. So if you squeamish, if you don't like hearing this kind of stuff, I implore you to step away because this is very gruesome. So as they are repeating mass rape hoax that are being debunked by Western media sources, smearing Palestinians as rapists, you have the IDF that literally having concentration camps where they are raping Palestinian men to death. They taken, actually, I'll just read it. You have a senior nurse who's a whistleblower said female officer ordered two soldiers to lift him up to press his rectum against a metal stick that was fixed to the ground. They said the stick penetrated his rectum for roughly 5 seconds, causing it to bleed and leaving him with unbearable pain. And there's a few of these testimonies where essentially they force these men to sit on rods, they inject it, they do all these horrific things. There was examples of prisoners dying because of their wounds as well because of this. Essentially, Palestinians are being tortured to death at concentration camps. But people are trying to tell me that Israel has the right to exist. And last thing, and I'll pass it to you for your overall thoughts. I want to share this clip here. This mass. I wouldn't even call this a fraudulent slip. I saw this from our friend that saw Ron. I wouldn't even call this a fraudulent slip. This is just them admitting what U.S. policy is.
They're embedded near civilians. Israel has a right to try and target those civilians, but they also.
Israel has the right to target civilians. They play this is the messaging coming from the Biden administration.
They're embedded near civilians. Israel has a right to try and target those civilians, but they also have the obligation to minimize civilian harm and take every step possible to minimize civilian harm. So that's why
they have the right to target civilians, but they should minimize civilian harm. You guys see the double speak? Dr. CBS, anything you want to chime in on before I continue?
You know, as they say, every accusation is a confession. Every single thing that Israel has accused Hamas of vis-a-vis the hostages is exactly what they're doing and have been doing to Palestinians for years, which is probably where they get the idea, you know, the charges that they're able to levy at Palestinians. And it's horrible and horrific. But something else that I want to emphasize is that it's not just this sort of pornography of violence that should have us incensed. It's also just the quotidian ways that Palestinians are suffering, not only because of this war, but in general. So, for example, there was a story about how Palestinian women don't even have access to sanitary napkins, right? They don't have access to just the daily things you need, let alone food and water, but just the daily things that are part of living a dignified life. And so I think that we all hone in on the horrific violence, like beheaded babies, people being blown to bits, but that can't be our threshold for caring. Our threshold for caring should be much less, right? We should be equally incensed about the cultural destruction that's happening, about the displacement, about the killing of journalists, about the incessant lies that are being told in the mainstream media. All of this stuff, all of these are part of genocide, and all of these things matter. And so you know, just like I've never watched a single video of a Black person being murdered by the police. I don't watch,
Yeah.
unless it's our timelines are flooded with it. I don't watch the horrific videos because I don't need proof that the IOF is a terrorist organization. I don't need proof that Palestinians are human and deserve to live a dignified life on their own land. And so I also I'm a little bit ambivalent about how much we lift up these atrocities. I think we do need to document. I think that we need to document them because they're crimes against humanity, but that shouldn't be the only evidence by which we're able to use everything in our toolkit to advocate for Palestinian folks.
Yeah, it's funny. I'm glad you brought that up because we talked about this on RBN before. How I don't like all these videos of Palestinians going around. I've been trying my best to avoid them. I haven't. It took me like weeks, maybe like 3 or 4 months before I even seen the George Floyd video. For example, like I
I've
purposely
never seen it.
Yeah, I'm glad because and I seen it. Like I didn't seek it out. It was one of the things I was like, oh damn, that was it, because I don't need to be proven that. And I actually had a discussion with a friend of mine about that because it's like, man, like I don't like the idea of like people monetizing like Black pain and Palestinian pain is kind of upsetting. The Twitter, there's a lot of these big X account making so much money off of Palestinian pain, but it got people mobilized, man. It's so because I want results. I want what's proven to work. If showing Black bodies is what it takes to get people to sympathize with us, I don't like that reality, but that is what does it, unfortunately. And then it's the fine line because we shouldn't have to do that. There shouldn't be like this fetishization of our corpses. And that's my criticism of Western liberals before, where they have solidarity with the corpses of Palestinians, but not their missiles, not their wins and the resistance. So I think it's a very interesting conversation, like that balance that people strike, because some people do have to see it because it's different than seeing 5,000 children murdered in a bombing versus seeing it. So I think it's an interesting conversation.